Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for another very exciting webinar. Welcome to Inside Premium, a live session with Seeking Alpha's founder. My name's Fred. I'm the lead product manager for Premium and Pro. I'm here with two others today, Brandon Datt, the senior product manager for Premium and Pro. Brandon, thanks for joining us today. I'm also here with the founder and CEO of Seeking Alpha, David Jackson. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks for having me.
Course. Brandon and I are very excited for David to join us today. He's going to dive into how he uses Premium and demonstrate the features that he uses and loves the most. So we're very excited about that. Before we get into that, I will go ahead and quickly read our disclosure. So past performance is no guarantee of future results. Any views or opinions expressed in this webinar do not reflect those of Seeking Alpha as a whole. Any content and tools on the platform are offered for information purposes only. Seeking Alpha Portfolio is a tool for tracking news and analysis and does not constitute a brokerage account or enable any trading activity. Seeking Alpha does not take account of your objectives or your financial situation and does not offer any personalized investment advice. Seeking Alpha is not a licensed securities dealer, broker, U.S. investment advisor, or investment bank. All right. And so with that, David Jackson, the founder and CEO of Seeking Alpha, he's going to be demoing the premium features he uses and loves the most. I'll be in the chat. Brandon will be in the chat. We'll be providing links and other helpful info, as well as responding to questions. So feel free to type your questions into the chat as David demos the product. Don't wait until the end to type your questions into the chat. Feel free to go ahead and do that as soon as we go ahead and start demoing. And just as a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and sent out via email afterwards. So that's the housekeeping items, and now we'll get into the good stuff. So, David, without further ado, I'll pass it over to you to take it away.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Fred, for that introduction. I saw in some of the comments that popped up that some people are saying that there's an echo with the sound. I hope that that's no longer the case now that the sound has switched to me. Um, I want to kick off just by saying a really big thank you to each of you who's turned up for the webinar. As you probably know, if you've heard me speak in the past, or just when you speak to our product managers, um, we use our own product the whole time. We love our product, and and we're tremendously appreciative when other people use our product. And so I really want to kick this off by saying that what I'm about to show you is very personal. It's the way I use Seeking Alpha. It's not a sales pitch. It's not a demo of features which we particularly want people to use. If you find what I'm showing you useful for you, then that's really wonderful. If it's not useful for you, I hope that you'll be forgiving and that you'll be able to say, well, here's how this guy uses the Seeking Alpha platform. And as I said, just a moment ago, I really want to thank each and every one of you for being a Seeking Alpha customer and being a user of our product that we put so much into. And thank you for turning up for this webinar. Okay, with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how so the main features of the Seeking Alpha Premium product that I personally use, and in particular, how there's a couple of new features which for me have been real game changers in my use of the platform. These are new features that we in the product team really wanted, and we wanted for our own personal use. By extension, we thought that these features would be extremely helpful for all of our customers and our premium users. And so I'm excited to show you how I'm personally using some of the new features that we've launched in a very central way in my own experience. I'm going to screen share now. Here we go. I hope that the screen sharing is working.
Looks
Um,
great.
Hopefully what's come up here is my homepage. Um, okay. Um, for me, the I spend most of my time in Seeking Alpha on the desktop or on a laptop. Although I use Seeking Alpha a lot when I'm on the go on my mobile phone. But my really heavy usage during the day is on a desktop or laptop. And the two main areas that I live in are the homepage, which I've customized, and the portfolios. And in this demo, I'm going to spend more time on the portfolios than I am on the homepage. But I want to point out just a linkage between the two, which is I set up a lot of watch lists and portfolios for myself in Seeking Alpha. And a really great way to track them in aggregate is actually from the homepage. That I'm going to scroll down, and here you can see that you can customize your homepage, and you can choose which units appear on your homepage. And the top unit that I choose to appear on my homepage beneath the trending news and the trending analysis articles is this unit called Portfolio Movers, which takes the stocks which are moving in all of my watch lists and portfolios and simply lists which ones out of the whole lot are performing the best and which are performing the worst. And so this is a very nice kind of wrap up view of all of the watch lists that I'm tracking if I just want to see, hey, what is it that's really moving today? With that, I'm gonna move to talk about how I use portfolios. What you can see from my navigation is because I'm the founder of Seeking Alpha, I get to sign up for all of our products. So you can see that I'm signed up for Pro, I'm signed up for Alpha Picks, I'm signed up for our new quant growth and income product that we're very excited about. And then beneath that, in my navigation, are a whole load of portfolios and watch lists. And I want to kick off by showing you how I actually use portfolios and watch lists in the core of my usage of the product. So I'm going to start with what here, which is a watch list that I've named one indicators. Uh, why have I put a one in front of the name? Well, this is actually a hack. We haven't yet rolled out the ability to edit your nav, although that's something that we're thinking about a lot. And because I want to order my watch lists and portfolios the way I want them to be ordered, and they order automatically in alphabetical order, it means that I can hack that by naming watch lists and portfolios with a number at the beginning. And that way I can fix the exact order. So I start off my day by looking at key indicators for the market. And so what you see here is that I've got a whole load of macro indicators. DXY is the dollar index. Then there's the yield on the 6-month, 12-month, and 10-year Treasury. So I can see what's happening to interest rates. Then I've got Bitcoin, Ether, gold, the gold mining ETFs, copper. VTI is the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index. So that's the equivalent of the S&P 500. It's slightly wider. QQQ is the Nasdaq 100. VXUS is the Vanguard's Total International Stock Index Fund. It's the wonderful thing about ETFs is that there's such a rich ecosystem of ETFs that you can really track almost any asset class simply by finding an ETF which tracks it. So here at International Stocks, VT is the total world index, so I can see what's going overall with equity markets. FRDM is an emerging market index that's an interesting one. And then there's some sector stuff. So here's the energy sector, which has been very relevant recently. The technology sector, SMH is specifically semiconductors, which is, as probably most of us are aware, have really been at the eye of the action of AI in terms of the stocks which have performed the best have generally been the semiconductor stocks which are providing semiconductors for AI. SW is software and services because I'm watching carefully the meltdown among software stocks as people are worried about the cannibalization of particularly enterprise software by AI. And then the last indicator that I've got here is a global defense tech ETF, um, because that's also been very interesting to track. Now, um, this is our portfolios and our watch lists provide a way to personalize any view that you want. So once I've chosen all of these indexes that I want to scan every morning, the beauty is that with a custom view, here where at the top of the nav it says add or edit views, and you can add a custom view, you can choose what you see in your view of your portfolio. So in this case, because of these indicators, um, I'm I'm interested in how have these things changed in the last month, year to date, the last year. What's the day range? Like how volatile are these things during the day, and what's the 52 week range? And that really is the majority of this view. Um, that I've done something similar with, but you'll see it looks very different with companies which are um, in similar or related industries to Seeking Alpha. Now, these are companies that I'm not watching from an investing perspective. I'm watching them for my job, which is I need to be aware of what's going on in the industry that Seeking Alpha operates in. And so here's a second watch list, which I'm clicking on now in my nav, called work related. And these companies are financial companies, brokerages, um, uh, companies that provide financial data, also internet companies that are in some ways related to what Seeking Alpha is doing. And here you can see that I've chosen a very different view. I customize the view here, and I don't always remember the names of all these companies. So in this view, it shows the full name of the company. Um, it does show some data about how the company, how each of these stocks has done in the last month, and it shows the 52-week range. But in this case, I'm also interested in the market cap, like how big is this company? Um, and so you can see that I'm tracking brokerages like Webull and Coinbase, that's crypto brokerage, and many of the others, and then financial data companies like and there's Robinhood as well. Financial data companies like FactSet, Morningstar, MSCI, exchanges like NASDAQ, online news, which is New York Times, News Corporation. These are all, in some ways related to or relevant to what's going on in Seeking Alpha. And this opportunity to allow me to customize the view makes it very easy for me to track exactly what I want to track here. Um, the I can then track the news on these companies, or I can, at the bottom, I can look at what analysis is being written about them, or if I want to see what they're saying on their earnings calls, I can click on transcripts and I can read the transcripts where there's a lot of really valuable information about what's going on in the industries and what these companies are saying. So far, what I've showed you is not new. It's part of my daily workflow. Um, here's another view, which is companies that might be used as what investment bankers call comps for Seeking Alpha, meaning are comparables. And here, what I'm interested in is how profitable are these companies, and what kind of valuation are they trading at. And so in this custom view, I've called it comps view, as you can see at the top in the nav, and I'm showing valuation metrics here. This is what I've chosen, and I haven't chosen a huge amount. It's nice and clean and simple, and it gives me a quick view of what kind of valuations the stocks in our industry or related industries are trading at. Um, what I now want to show you is how I'm using some of the new features that we've launched. And I'm going to do that by showing you a portfolio that I set up near the beginning of the year when our quant team released their top stocks of 2026. It was for the first half of 2026. We recently released the top stocks for the second half for H2 2026 from our quant team. And so these were the top quant stock picks in the first half of the year. And here, what I've done is I wanted to actually track the performance of these stock picks in real time. And to do that, what I did was I actually went and assumed that for every single one of the stocks, let me just see whether it's in here. I think so. For every one of the stocks, what I did was I I put a notional $5,000 in each stock. Um, and so I simply, took the share price of the stocks when, the day after we picked them, or the day we picked them actually, um, assumed that I was going to buy $5,000 of each of these stocks. I didn't actually do that. I wanted to track the performance. And so I calculated the number of shares based on the price at the time so that it would be $5,000 worth. Um, Put in the information as if I'd bought each of these stocks on that day and put 5,000 bucks into the stock with the price. And that way I can track the performance of the portfolio. Um, and this is where things get interesting because, as you can see, this is the list of the 10 stocks that our quant team picked at the beginning of 2026. And you can see that they've done pretty well. As of now, they're up 38.5%, which is great. At the time, they all had strong buy quant ratings, and so you can see in the column of the quant ratings that most of them have still got strong buys, or at least a buy. One of them has kind of fallen to a hold, INCY. Here's where things get interesting. Um, we've added data columns in custom views that give you the ability to choose more things, and a few of them are particularly interesting. The first thing that I added was days held. Days held shows me, okay, how long have I been notionally holding this stock for? And so this shows that when our team, launched this portfolio and I notionally bought 5,000 bucks of each of the stocks, that was 203 days ago. So my holding period is 203 days. But what I really want to know isn't just, well, how have these picks done on an absolute basis? They're up. You can see the total is that they're up just over 38%. But a more relevant question is, how have they performed relative to the S&P 500? So one of the things that we added in custom views is there's a section in custom views for relative performance, where you can, or benchmarks, where you can actually choose to compare the performance of your holding compared to some kind of benchmark. And in this column next to days held, you'll see that there's a column called return versus SPY. So this shows me how has the return of this stock been compared to SPY, which tracks the S&P 500. And so you can see, for example, for the first stock, that it's up just under 31% since it was originally picked 203 days ago. And that is 24.47 percentage points better than the S&P 500. And so that's done really well. And then the other column that we added here, that I've adopted, is annualized return, which is, okay, I want to see, even for stocks where I'm holding them for a shorter period of time, how well have they done given that I'm only holding them for a short period of time? And the annualized return annualizes whatever the return was for the period that you've got. If it's less than a year, it annualizes it up to a full year. And if you've been holding something for more than a year, it annualizes it down and says, what's your average per year, if you like, in terms of your annualized return. Now, what's very powerful here is that this allows me to look at the performance of the entire portfolio and compare it to the S&P 500. So there at the bottom of the return SPY versus SPY column is the return of this entire collection of stocks compared to the S&P 500. And it shows that they're up 52%. The way the return versus SPY works is it uses weighted average. So if I had put different amounts of capital money into different positions, it would show me the weighted average of all of that return rather than a simple average. So this for me is really powerful. And this is going to take me to the next feature that we released, which when combined with this, for me, is really powerful. And I'm now going to click on another watch list or portfolio here, which I've called holdings, because these are things which I hold myself and I bought myself. Now, that isn't literally true of all of these because I didn't want to do a webinar with thousands of people and show you my personal portfolio, um, including all my investment failures, right? My bad stock picks and other things. We can do a webinar about that very happily, and I'll show you all of my catastrophes. But this gives you a broad sense of the kinds of stocks that I'm picking and how I manage that. Now, the key difference that you'll see in this custom view is that is that I've divided the holdings here or the stocks in this view into groups. And so the first one's called alpha picks because these are stocks which I picked because they were alpha picks, right? And then I've got a section called core ETFs and a section called gold stocks. You can see that they were bought about 2 years ago, right? Or just over one of them a year ago as I moved from one into another. But these I've been holding for a long time because I had a thesis that the US had that we generally in the Western world have problems with chronic budget deficits, and also due to certain kind of geopolitical factors that governments would start to move from holding US treasuries to holding gold, and that would boost demand for gold. And combined with deficit-driven fears about inflation, that the gold would do well. And that turned out actually to be correct. And these were actual stock picks. And this shows the real date that I bought them. And so there's a section here for gold stocks. I'm watching very carefully what's going on in defense tech. It's an area that I'm interested in. And so there's a stock here which is a pick which I think is a company which has a very strong presence in next generation defense and drones. Here are stock picks from the pro quant portfolio, and then here are what I've called tactical ETF picks, which are ETFs which I chose on a tactical basis to hold, not necessarily for very long periods of time, but because I thought that they would do well kind of tactically. GLDM actually should not be in there. And that actually gives me an opportunity to show you something in a second. Now, how did I set up these groups? If you see at the top right of my screen above the portfolio, there's a little area that says group by, and I've chosen custom. And what happens is when you click on that, you can group the stocks which you've got by sector or industry or country or asset type. But what's really interesting for me and what I immediately jumped to was naming my own groups. And the most powerful thing for me in naming my own groups is it allowed me to say, okay, listen, I'm picking stocks or ETFs in various different ways. And I'd like to group the holdings that I have by the strategies that I use to choose them. And that way I can actually evaluate how I did. And so if I click on this little pencil icon, let me just show you that again, because maybe that was too fast. I click on the drop down for group by. At the bottom is custom, so I can select custom. But if I move my cursor to the little pencil, that allows me to edit custom groups. And so I can just choose to, I can create any tag that I want to. So I've created alpha picks, core ETFs, gold stocks, new defense, tech and drones, and pro quant portfolio. And I've created these custom groups. I think I mentioned to you that I just discovered that in this GLDM is mistagged as a tactical ETF pick when in fact it should be a core ETF pick. So I'm going to change it to core ETFs from tactical ETF picks, and then I'm going to save that. And you can see here that GLDM just moved to core ETFs, if you like, from tactical. So you can very easily move stocks and ETFs around within different custom groups. Now, why did I say earlier that the group functionality that we've introduced, this ability to set up groups in your portfolio, then interplays with the other features that we launched, like the ability to track what your returns are versus the S&P 500. Because when you set up a group, the group shows the subtotal for that group. This is very powerful because this now means that I can look at different strategies and I can say, hey, how is this strategy actually performing versus the S&P 500? So, for example, if I look at my tactical ETF picks, um, well, I'm quite lucky. I think I hacked this a bit. The reality is probably a lot worse than I'm showing you. So I don't want you all to think, yes, this is exactly kind of how I've done. But what this is actually going to show is that the subtotal for tactical ETF picks is minus 4.1%, right, versus the S&P 500 versus SPY. So my tactical ETF picking isn't actually very successful. Right? I can look at the subtotal for the group of tactical ETF picks. I can look at the total for all of my picks, right? And in all the different groups, and I'm beating the S&P 500 by 40 percentage points, which is remarkable and is more than the reality. I can tell you that. Um, but here I can look at an individual group and say, hey, listen, that strategy didn't work very well. In contrast, I can look at stocks that I bought because they were in the pro quant portfolio and they've performed spectacularly well. They're beating the S&P 500 by 42 percentage points, right? And the average holding period is only 187 days, right? Similarly, I can look at gold stocks and see that that strategy works really well. Core ETFs, given that they're core on the core of my portfolio, I'm very happy that they're beating the S&P 500. One of them is the S&P 500. It's the Vanguard 500 Index ETF, VOO. So you can see that that's pretty much flat with the S&P 500. It's very slightly beating it, probably because of the price that I bought it on that day. And you can see that that's an older holding at 5 years, things like that. So you can see. So by using this view, I can look at all of the strategies that I've got. I can look at my performance. I can choose my benchmark. I've chosen to compare my performance to the S&P 500 in the view picker to set up a custom view. You can choose all sorts of benchmarks. Like you can choose a tech index if you want, or a dividend stock index, a dividend growth stock index, or a high yield stock index. So this way you can actually, for me, I can measure my performance against all of these benchmarks. The final thing that I want to show you is something that I mentioned in the last webinar, which is one of the things that I'm very interested in is, do I sell stocks or ETFs too early? Do I sell stocks or ETFs based on emotion rather than when I should be selling them? And to answer that question, what I did was I set up a portfolio where every time I sell a stock and close a position, I put it in this portfolio as if I bought it on that day in the amount that I bought it. And so this is really interesting because here you can see that there were a whole load of stocks that I bought because they were originally flagged by our quant system as strong buys, and they were great stocks. And I bought them, and then I sold them. And since I sold them in combination, they've beaten the S&P 500 by 29%, percentage points, not percent, percentage points, right? And so this shows that I clearly shouldn't have sold all of those stocks, right? They comfortably beat the S&P 500. I sold a bunch of gold stocks. I actually reduced my position in the gold stocks. And here it turns out that was a good decision. The gold stocks have underperformed the S&P 500 by 26 percentage points. And they're actually down 17%, right, in total. I had a whole load of thematic buys of stocks that I bought because I thought this is a theme that's going to play out well. For example, three of these stocks are Argentinian banks. I was very excited by Milel's free market reforms in Argentina and believed that that would benefit the Argentinian banking system a lot. And it turned out that selling those stocks when I did sell them wasn't too bad. They've performed 6 percentage points better than the S&P 500 since I sold them, which isn't an enormous amount, but bottom line is I shouldn't have sold them. We have a wonderful contributor called Chris DeMuth, who's just a terrific person and astonishingly talented investor. He runs an investing group. And this was one of Chris DeMuth's stock picks from a long time ago that I bought. And I sold it just over, two years ago, 2 years and 163 days, so almost 2.5 years ago. And it's up 125% since I sold it, right? It has solidly beaten the S&P 500. And here's a, and here I'd dabbled in some tactical ETFs, Ether, and then some kind of, materials ETFs near the beginning of the year, you can see, and selling them was a good decision. And so I can compare that to the S&P 500. Okay, I'm going to turn off sharing. I hope that this was helpful. It's very personal, as I said at the beginning. Um, I think that playing with custom views and looking at all of the columns that we have and all of the different views that you can set up, for me is very helpful in terms of my investing and also my work in terms of what I do. It provides me with the ability to really have a very personalized interface. And particularly now that we've launched the group feature where you can divide your stocks or your ETFs into different groups and you can track the performance of each of those groups. For me, that then multiplies the usefulness of all the features that we've put out, in setting up custom views. I hope that this was helpful. And it wasn't a full demo of how to set up a custom view or exactly how to use the group features. If any of you would like that, please let Fred and Brandon know. We have two really wonderful product managers on the line here who spend all of their time, building these great features and helping our customers to use them. So with that, thank you again, and I hope that this was helpful.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining. This will be sent out afterward in an email. I put a bunch of helpful links in the chat as well. So appreciate everyone for joining. Thank you, David and Brandon, and we'll be on another webinar soon. Thank you.